be recorded, so this later can be uploaded to our website. So the recording has started. My name is Miwa Park, and I am the WEPs coordinator at Women's Empowerment Principle Global Secretariat at the UN Women. For today's webinar, we have invited special guests from ExecuShe to present their findings and their status of the corporate gender power gap in G20 countries to coincide with the upcoming G20 and B20 summits. It's worth mentioning that together, the G20 members represent more than 80% of the world GDP, 75% of international trade, and 60% of the world population. So we will first hear from some introductory remarks from UN Women, and then invite ExecuShe to present its findings on the corporate gender power gap in G20 countries. After this backdrop, we will then invite representatives of 5 WEP signatories to share their journeys on advancing women's leadership in their companies. So please stay tuned until the very end. We also would like to hear from you in the audience. We have prepared 3 poll questions for today's event, so please participate when they go live. And throughout the webinar, please feel free to write your question to the panelists in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to communicate with other participants, please use the chat function. Your questions will be answered during the Q&A session or through the chat throughout the webinar. And again, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and later it'll be uploaded at www.weps.org website to share with general public. So to get us started, I'd like to invite Anna Falk, the Global Head of UN Women's Empowerment Principle at UN Women, to deliver her opening remarks. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Miwa. And the reason why we are focusing today on G20 is indeed because it has a lot of impact on global economy in terms of the size of the population, etc. But I'm very happy to be here today, and welcome to all of you. The participants are speakers who are joining us today, but also those who will be listening to the recording in a few days. So welcome to all of you. Many of you are joining as representative of WEP signatory companies. Thank you very much for joining and for doing a great job on working on gender equality. For those who are not and those who are planning to join the Women's Empowerment Principles, they offer a blueprint for organizations to systematically tackle obstacles to gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and community. Today, we'll cover the workplace issues all the way to the top and the leadership. And so far, 7,100 companies have made this commitment to the 7 principles. And the good thing is we have some research that shows evidence that companies that have made this commitment, where there is a CEO that has made this public commitment, they are doing significantly better than companies that have not signed on to the Women's Empowerment Principle in at least 12 gender-specific KPIs. Today, we will be discussing the corporate gender power gap. ExecuShe, who will be showing their research findings, they will talk about how underrepresented women are, with a specific focus on G20 countries. How certain executive roles have a gendered lens to it. There are some that there are more substantively larger share of men and some that are substantively larger share of women. And they will also talk a little bit about the implications of this division or the gender power gap. As mentioned by Miwa, we will also have an opportunity to listen to 5 of our WEP signatory companies and how they have tackled persistent glass ceilings, glass walls, sticky floors, or all the different concepts that we are using to describe the challenges of women making it to the top. And these different concept or these challenges and obstacles are really siloing women into limited corporate roles and continue to block them from advancing the corporate pipeline and attaining senior executive level positions. But before I hand over to the team, let me give you some recent stats from the public sector, just to put these figures that we'll hear today into some perspective. In September, only 28 countries in the world had a woman head of state or government. That's about 14%. And 21% of government ministers were women. And again, we have this siloing of what portfolios these ministers are covering in the government. Women primarily carrying portfolios of family, social affairs, employment, women and gender affairs, but also environment, which is great with the strong climate agenda that is being addressed at this point in time. Looking at the parliament, 26% of all parliamentarians are women. This can be compared a little bit with the mini parliaments in companies in form of the boards. And actually the board positions held by women are slightly higher than the parliamentarians. And that is very much due to and thanks to the increase to about from 24% just 2 years ago to 29% this year, according to Moody. So there is a lot of effort happening on women on board. Today, we will not speak about women on boards. We will speak about women in executive positions. And we will see that there's a lot of work to be done there too. But today, there are only 5 countries in the world that have reached 50-50 women in parliament. I'd like to name Rwanda, Cuba, Nicaragua, Mexico, and the United Arab Emirates. But there are also 24 countries where women's representation is less than 10%. It's very important that women are part of decision-making. It makes decisions more effective and more inclusive. So this topic is highly relevant, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today, both to hear from the ExecuShe team and the panel. So over back to you, Miwa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, for your wonderful opening remarks. And now I'd like to invite Bess Hsieh and Andreas Hoepner from ExecuShe to present on their findings. Bess and Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Miwa. Thanks to UN Women for having ExecuShe here. It is much appreciated. I'm Bess, Head of Financial Data Scientist at ExecuShe. And before we present our unique gender finding, I'd like to begin with a poll question. Can you guess which are the most common executive level positions held by men and women in G20s? And here are 3 options. And the first is woman human resources officer and man executive officers. The second is woman chief marketing officers and man technology officers. And the last one is chief diversity officers and man executive chair. And would also like to mention here, it is unfortunate that we only show men and women in the options here. We collect executive with it who is actually either represented in the annual report, official filings, or our website. Although we have tried our best to include all genders, so far none of the executives we have covered has identified themselves as non-binary in their biographies. So let's make guessing. Thanks everyone for answering the questions. Yes, it's very good guessing. We have the highest votes to women CHRO and men CEO. And should we move on to the answer slides, please? Thank you, Miwa. And yes, HR and CEO are both very typical women and men positions. And according to our studies, almost 70% of chief diversity officers are women, and 95% of executive chair are men. It's quite a very huge gap here. And now I would like to share with you a headline from Fortune about a study led by ExecuShe. Next, please. Thank you. According to our study, women executives only control 1% of shares among the top and biggest American companies, sometimes even less. And you may wonder why this is important to gender power gap and why it is something that we need to act now. Next, please. The total number of women executives headcount in top American companies is gradually ticking up in the past 10 years. And 6 years ago, men to women headcount ratio was 6:1, and now we have 3:1. Next, please. What if we add one condition here, only focusing on those top executives who hold company shares? It will be 4:1. And of course, we know that headcount is not equivalent to power. They show a very distinct difference between management and decision making. For example, a company might have more than 30% of women executives on the table, but women might be in the specific roles like HR or other roles where, unfortunately, with less power. Next, please. This is an overall gender gap that you as women executives are now experiencing. If you look at the management headcount, the ratio is 3:1. But if you consider their power, the ratio becomes 99:1. It's really sad to see how small the woman part is. Even we try hard to enlarge the woman icon, we can still barely see them. So now the question is, how do we measure executives' power by gender? Next, please. To know how powerful executives are, we monitor their share value in the companies from official reports like SEC filings. We look at their share value because the shares give them the right to vote on corporate decision making. And with our ExecuShe database, we are able to know the gender of the top executive members. Then we can further calculate the monetary weighted power of women executives proportional to all executives. We all know that we have been on the road to gender equality for decades, but as you can see, I believe we still have some room for improvements. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andreas, who is going to show us some G20 gender statistics and analysis. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Bess. My name is Andreas. I'm a professor of operational risk, banking and finance at the University College Dublin and scientific advisor to ExecuShe. In the US, we basically have two numbers. Male executives in the S&P 500 own about 700 billion in share value, and female own 7. Now, the US actually helps us to calculate this because the SEC has this fantastic disclosure, which we don't really have for other countries. So we have to estimate for other countries what the power is based on the positions that male and female executives respectively hold. If we can move on to the next slide, I'll be very happy to explain this with an example. So in this example, we're just going to look at 6 positions. The actual data set is more than 70 positions for 5,700 companies. And we're only going to look at 3 industries just to see the stereotypical changes in these industries. Moving forward to explain the differences between the industries on the next slide, we can actually see that in the technology and hardware and equipment industry, the chief technology officer in green is 11% of the power among all the executives. And of course, the executives are full-time, they make decisions every day. They're not part-time as many of the board members. And so the CTO is pretty much as powerful as the chief financial officer in technology and hardware. Compare this with consumer services, where the chief financial officer is 9 times more powerful than the CTO. And compare this with, for instance, media entertainment, where again, the chief financial officer is a lot more powerful. In consumer services, the chief operating officer is very powerful and highly relevant. And similarly, the chief operating officer is an important role in media and entertainment. So if a female became chief technology officer in consumer services, that doesn't unfortunately mean very much. But if the female became chief technology officer in technology itself, that would mean a lot more. And likewise, a chief operating officer in consumer services means a lot, while it doesn't actually mean that much in tech. So we then have the ability to take the power in a given industry and move that to companies around the world, as I'll explain on the next slide for two hypothetical tech companies. So assuming these hypothetical tech companies have the same split, that's why the chart looks the same way. If in one tech company on the very right, the actual CFO, for instance, was female and all the other executives were male, we had a 7-to-1 gender power gap. But if out of these 6 executives, the only female was the chief human resource officer, we'd have a 24-to-1 power gap, because in a tech company, normally the CFO has a lot more say in decision-making than the chief human resource officer. And so we use that estimation approach because no other country than the United States gives us the actual shareholdings for all the firms to then be able to actually show you data globally for all the G20, which we believe is highly interesting. As we continue. So in essence, it's the same equation that Bess just presented, just instead of the actual shares, we have the estimated voting power in the numerator, and likewise the estimated voting power in the denominator. And that gives us the gender power gap estimated for around the world. And continuing. We then have another question for the poll. How much more power in corporate leadership is held by men globally? So that's around the world. Are we looking around the world for the average company at 9-to-1, at 3-to-1, or at 13-to-1? And it's important to say here, this is the average company, since we don't have the actual share values. We can't do the 700 billion to 7 billion. And even in the US, the average company is not 99-to-1, because the 99-to-1 is skewed by the tech companies. Miwa, I trust that you'll switch to the results once we have them.
Yes, they are. So let's give them 10 more seconds.
Sure, I'm very happy to that. To not skew the results, as said, so the average company, if, for instance, at Nasdaq's women would hold 70% of the power, that will skew the average a lot more upwards compared to a universe perspective where we're looking at. Okay, it's great to see. 13-to-1 is the most common estimate, was 53%, and only 8% sadly believe that it's 3-to-1, and yes, that is not correct. Anyway, if you can really show the route, it's 9-to-1 globally. That has to do with the averaging, that individual companies that are really good can bring this average up a lot, while companies that are really bad on the 0 or 1% don't disturb it that much. If you calculated the whole universe, it actually wouldn't be that good. And now we move to the global numbers. So here on the screen, you see the global numbers, and we will share this slide so that everybody can see it in full detail. In the population, of course, we're 50-50. In gender diversity globally, we're about 17% female among executives, so full-time staff, and power only 11%. And when you look at the countries, I find it extremely interesting that this is not a classic developing country story, because gender power in South Africa and Indonesia, for instance, is pretty strong. It's actually leading globally together with Australia, the UK, France, and Canada. The countries that have the least gender power among the G20 will be Saudi Arabia, then Argentina, Japan, Korea, and also India and China don't have that strong gender power. Of course, what we are calling strong gender power here, or the strongest, is Australia on 21%. That is still about a 5-to-1 ratio for men. So there's a lot to go to actual parity. If you look at the table on the side, you can also see how gender diversity actually plays out across the different levels. And that is another, I think, very interesting statistical insight. So in the key C-suite, that's the absolute top positions, gender diversity is still very, very low. When we go into the main C-suite, that's the functional roles, like chief HR, for instance, gender diversity in South Africa is already 46%, Australia is 40%, G20-wide is 22%. When we then drop into the subsidiary C-suite, so this is profit and loss relevant roles in subsidiary brands, it goes down actually, possibly due to, say, travel requirement in subsidiaries. And only when we look at the executive pipeline, which are roles that are normally not in the main C-suite, but actually are about to get an individual towards the main C-suite, it goes up again. We define these categories of the subsidiary, we define it by the actual subsidiary to the main parent entity. Main C-suite and executive pipeline are again differentiated by the shares held of the individuals. And if I could share the screen for a little bit, I could just for 3 minutes show you where the actual data comes from. So if you can see my screen, and we're happy to give anyone trial access who's interested, we have all the different categories here. Key C-suite, main C-suite, subsidiary C-suite, executive pipeline, executive pool. And you can see all sorts of individual roles, which could, of course, be processed by male or female. Then, which is very key with us, that we're live monitoring the gender data. So I can switch the entire database in an instant to a different date, and you will see the numbers changing. I switch it to mid of August, or I can switch it to early March. It is continuously monitored week and week so that we actually live can see how progress is made and we don't have to wait for annual reports. Everything is then also looked at from an investor basis. So 5,200 investors, Vanguard, BlackRock, and so forth, and their actual portfolios are monitored. And in total, the database at this stage does include 75,000 individuals. So that's about 25,000 female role models, actually 77,899 individuals. And so we will be able to continuously monitor the progress of gender diversity among the executives of companies around the world, G20, of course, only being examples. You may have seen that the G20 actually was on average slightly weaker than the world. That is, of course, because certain Scandinavian countries aren't in the G20 and they bring the average up for the overall world. And so I'm very much looking forward to the actual panel discussion. And I believe we're exactly on time. Thank you very much. Handing over to the exceptional panel.
Perfect. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And before we move on to the panels, we actually do have a question from the audience for ExecuShe. I think it'll be interesting for Andreas to answer. So this is the question from Mara Boris. Thank you for the Bolis. Thank you for the question. She's asking, can you please repeat how you manage the estimate for countries where there are no disclosures? Are you able to do this analysis on a company by company basis?
Yes, so disclosures on the company by company basis are virtually always there. Pretty much all companies disclose at the very least the names of the executives. Among over 6,000 companies which we've analyzed, and we do analyze also private equity held companies, the only company where we can't find names of executives is actually McAfee Security Services because of hacking risk for the individuals if the executive's name was known. But even that you can then Google. So we have the individual positions and we have the information as the holder is male or female. What we do not have outside the United States is the shares that they hold. And so in essence, the power they bring to corporate decision-making. Very easy example, in Tesla, Alphabet, Meta, and so forth, certain male individuals sit at the corporate decision-making table among the executives and hold 99% of all the shares of everybody at the table. So they have a massively outsized power in decision-making because they can obviously also vote their shares if they would need to. And so we compute for every industry how important the role is. So a CTO, for instance, as we saw, holds 11% of the power in the tech industry, but only 2% of the power in the consumer industry. And then we compute for every country outside the United States. We look at all the executives, we look which executive roles are filled by females, and then we add up the power of the roles filled by females. So if, for instance, only a chief human resource officer is female in the consumer industry, then I believe that number would be 4% gender power for females in that particular company. And everything is done company by company. And of course, then the company numbers are averaged across the countries to show you the G20 country numbers. And very happy to take any further questions on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thank you so much for Bess and Andreas for these fascinating findings. And I hope all those who are connected today have found these findings interesting as well. We look forward to follow how these countries progress over time. And from now on, I'm giving the floor back to Anna to moderate the roundtable discussion with the 5 web signatory companies. Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to continue this conversation and hear real life experiences. Before I do so, and before I introduce the panelists, we will be sharing the recording of this webinar, so you can listen to it again. And if you need anything, you can contact us at weps@unwomen.org, and we will collect all the questions that I see are still coming in to the ExecuShe team. We'll collect them and share, and then we'll share with all of the participants afterwards. So let's move on to the panel discussion. We have invited 5 great web signatory companies. Let me introduce them one by one, and then we'll start a conversation. So we have Cindy Wiryakusuma Mekuloid, which is, she is the head of social impact and inclusion at GoTo in Indonesia. We have Julia Wines, manager of diversity and talent management at Continental in Germany. We have Natalie Deacon of corporate affairs at Natura, representing Avon today. We have Darshni Padayashi, transformation, equality and inclusion lead at RMB in South Africa. And we have Ilana Fahima, chief people's officer, ICL Group in Israel. So welcome all of you to this conversation. We are all very excited to hear your live experience, and we have selected you because you have a good track record on these issues. So let me kick off the conversation with a question for all of you to highlight the status of women in leadership positions in your company, and what measures did you take to achieve these results? So Cindy, can I ask you to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you,
Hi,
Cindy.
everyone. The status of women in our companies, we have 4 companies in our group, 4 major companies in our group, providing ride-hailing services, on-demand delivery services, and e-commerce. Across those different categories, we have 29% of women, so almost 30% of women in leadership positions. What have we done that has gotten us there? We've tracked and measured over the last few years. We know that diversity and inclusive practices are good for everyone, not just our employees, but also our suppliers, our customers, and the communities we serve. So we try to take a diversity and inclusion perspective to all that we do. And some of the concrete actions we've taken in the past include things like running job ads through language analyzers to understand how masculine or feminine they may be, and also doing sort of targeted recruiting and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you, Cindy. Julia, would you like to go next?
Of course, sure. Thank you. So Continental is actually an automotive supplier. So I'm not sure if you know that, but our women, the share of our women is a bit lower than when you compare it to other companies. But we have reached actually a 16% gender share in our management team, which has doubled by the 10 years time. So what we did is similar to Cindy. We also set ourselves some targets. We made sure our management team is also being compensated based on whether we reach our target or not. So we actually put in a lot of accountability and ownership for our management for the gender KPI in general. And we're quite happy that since last year, we also have 40% of female in our executive board. So our latest chief financial officer is also a woman, which is a great achievement from our side. What we have done in order to implement this, well, first we have set ourselves the targets as mentioned, then we did a lot around communication. So still the business case around diversity, why is it so important to have this? And we have addressed like things like our unconscious biases with regards to workshops, online learnings, and so forth. So there's a lot of learning resources that we are now making available for our employees. And we are also cooperating with another scientific economist who is looking into our data in order to understand where are we actually losing the talent in our pipeline.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. Natalie?
Hi, thank you very much. So great to be here. A really interesting presentation. Wonderful to hear from the other panelists. Avon's part of the Natura & Co group of companies. And as a group at Natura & Co, across our 4 companies, we have a shared commitment to life, which is a really stretching set of environmental and social sustainability targets, and the diversity, equity, inclusion agenda, specifically gender, is really crucial to that. So we had set ourselves a target to have 50% of women in our senior team by 2023, and we've already done that, and equitable pay for all by 2023, and we're pretty much there. I would stress, I think Avon is in a slightly different position to some of the other organisations we've even got on the panel today, particularly as I hear about your challenges, Julia, at Continental, because at Avon in particular, our core purpose is around supporting women. So we were set up 136 years ago on the premise of creating opportunities for women to earn and learn to set up their own beauty businesses. So for decades, our corporate responsibility and our kind of core commercial agenda has been focused on women. But interestingly, what that meant for us was we had a very female-focused culture at Avon, and the felt experience was very much that we were supporting women through their journey, but actually we weren't taking that systematic approach to make sure that we were consistently doing that. So one of the things we've really worked on in recent years is firstly making sure we've got the data to back up the felt experience, making sure we're always tracking that. We've been at 50% representation of women in our senior team for as long as we've been counting, but that can really easily change, and we're making sure that we continue to actively manage that. The other thing that's been really important for us in terms of taking a more systematic approach is to make sure we have consistent policy, we have consistent process, so that, for example, we have menopause policy, we've improved our maternity policies, we're making sure we're more supportive on parental leave beyond women, but both genders and the LGBTI community. So making sure we've got consistent policy so that no matter where you are in the world, whether you are in South Africa or Turkey or the UK, we're still working to the same standards to make sure that we're universally living that, and we haven't got any kind of aberrations that happen. And the thing for us is we're working with really diverse cultures across the countries in which we operate, and we need to take a tapered approach to that. So for example, in some of the countries in which we operate, it's really important to have a mentoring scheme to support women through their careers. Actually, in the UK, some of our women told us they didn't want specific female-focused mentoring policies. They didn't want to be part of a women's network. So I think it's really important that you make sure you've got that universality, but also that you flex according to the countries where you are.
Great, thanks, Natalie. Darshni, over to you.
So we are an investment bank in South Africa, and we also have been consistently 52% women overall. And we've just appointed our very first female CEO as well, which is extremely exciting. We are 37% female at senior management, 49% at mid-management, and 72% at junior management. But I think the game changer for us has really been two things. It's been a commitment from the board at the board level, and this commitment to gender equality coming over many years. And the second thing is that we've taken some very, very deliberate action and very deliberate steps. And one of the main things has been really sponsorship of women as opposed to just mentorship. So really sponsoring women to get into senior management and the C-suite as well. We obviously had to start off with the awareness as well, as so many of my colleagues have said. And that was really a conversation of this not being a man versus woman conversation. It was a conversation around this being good for business. We also very carefully look at measurement, setting our targets, and progress and accountability against those targets as well. The other thing we looked at was a lot of, again, policies and parental policy being a big one for us. We looked at how we support both parents in the workplace, because if we're going to achieve gender equality in the workplace, you've got to achieve it in the home as well. And so we've looked at on-site childcare facilities, mothers' rooms, and we have parental transition coaching for parents returning from maternity and paternity leave and having to deal with this new identity in the workplace. So those are just some of the things that we've done over the years.
Thank you so much. And then we have Ilana.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. We are ICL. ICL is an Israeli global company. We are actually spread in 40 countries across the world. Our mission, our promise to the world is that we feed the world with our very diverse portfolio of products and solutions. We support the agriculture and the food industry. So as you can understand, this type of industries used to be very male dominant in the past few decades. So our journey, our DI journey, started from a very basic need of a true transformation. So our win or our records is not the only achievement. We are very proud of the trend. So if we look at the top management, we are proud to say that in the past 3 years, we improved the mix, the gender mix from 13% to 22%. And this came with a very nice improvement in the board mix. There we moved from 20 to 33%. So this represents, as you can see, a very clear tone of the top. So I'm moving to how we did that, how we did this shift. And by the way, we are a very big company with 13,000 employees. In a multiple positions, with a heavy chunk, if you want, of operations. So this is the starting point, and if you want, the challenge. So what did you do to be in this position? First of all, we took a stand. We took a very clear stand with a clear commitment to the external indexes. We committed to Bloomberg 4 years ago. Of course, we are part of the WEP, and we also set internal KPIs, and we monitor them in a dedicated management and board discussion. But it doesn't add with KPIs, as you all know. The gender equality and the DI strategy is part of our ESG strategy. So this component is discussed as any ESG component, which is very important. It is on the table. So this is the tone of the top. But when you run a DI transformation, you actually need to have a cultural transformation. So what are we doing internally? Internally, we work very intensively on awareness. So of course, awareness has a lot to do with KPIs and status updates, but we actually started with holding up a mirror, making all the people accountable and understand that we have an issue, that we want to change the reality of our organization. Using KPI, using a lot of education, we have a list of learning opportunities that all managers can use, focusing on unconscious bias, understanding privilege, and more, in order to really be more aware. And of course, we celebrate globally. And last, we need to make it sustainable. So in order to do that, we are working very intensively on inclusiveness. Inclusiveness has a lot to do with creating ambassadors, allyship programs, and employee resource group. I'm personally sponsoring the European Employee Resource Group, and we had an amazing session today, of course, focusing on women resource group. And the last thing is really act. Proactively embed everything that has to do with DI in our people processes, talent, succession, even compensation. Everything has to do with creating an equal opportunity to all gender. So this is our journey.
Wow, this was a round of a lot of wealth of information. I'm not going to summarize all, but some of the measures that this group of panelists have taken that was key was target setting, measurement, and that really helps to increase awareness around the issues. Accountability for gender equality and compensating manager for making a progress on gender equality was another one. Tackling unconscious bias, understanding the data and such as retention, and when there are employees leaving, understanding why they're leaving, particularly if they are from underrepresented group within the company, consistency of policies, and also finally, just to mention the customization to the needs of women and in all their diversity, and not making assumptions that women need something or want something. We got the example of the mentorship program in the UK, but to actually ask the questions and see what exactly women need. So Ilana, if you could continue and just talk a little bit about the challenges and how you overcame those challenges. I think that can be helpful for other organizations that are addressing this, and learning from you and the other panelists, I think will be very important. So back to you, Ilana, and then we'll take another round.
Okay, so thank you. So of course it's a journey, and there are many challenges. The first one that I can think about is how do we make this trend everyone's responsibility. Gender equality is not a specific gender responsibility, as we all know, and we need to make it this trend very sustainable. And if we want to make it sustainable, we need to ensure that the very positive trend that we currently have, because all of the biggest investment on that will continue in the next years. And the way to do it is really to create an education or orientation for our leaders. Our leaders will manage the gender mix, and if you want, even the young leaders will manage it in the future. So one challenge is, how do you create a sustainable trend that will continue in the future? And as I said, the key investment in this area is really creating a diverse and inclusive leaders. And we invest a lot on educating our leaders to become inclusive and diverse in the way that they manage their business and they manage their team. So this is one challenge. Another challenge that I can share is, what narrative do you use? And by the way, the narrative is a way to engage people. So the narrative that we took is not that we are going to do this change, because this is a very massive transformation. The narrative that we took, as I said before, it is part of the ESG strategy. And as part of this strategy, we are here to make a better world. And the narrative that we use is that we need gender equality for our children. We are fixing, in a way, the world so our children will get more equal opportunities. And this is how we, if you want, convince not only the one gender, the male, the female, and everyone in between, that we are all part of this transformation. And there are a lot more, but I will let my colleagues in the panel to share.
Great. Thank you, Lana. I realize that we have only 15 minutes left and we have many questions coming from the audience. So I'll come back to you, Ilana, afterwards, but I will incorporate a few more questions to the other panelists as I hand over the floor to you. We've had a number of questions around, does greater inclusion lead to greater profit? I'm sure you hear this question all the time, like all the investments that you're making, do they pay off at the end? So if some of you want to take that question. Others are concerned with backlash from men, and you have, I think all of you have hinted to some extent of the importance of engaging men in this agenda and not leave them out. And there are some people that like to have some clarity of what sponsorship actually means versus mentorship. So we'd like to know also, like, one key recommendation. Some people we talked about a lot of different measures, but if they're limited capacity, limited time, what is the most effective measure? We got as one question. So if you could talk a little bit about those and maybe also some of your next steps. And Ilana, I'll come back to you so you have a chance to also answer these questions. But let's bring it to Darshni at this point.
So I'll cover the question on sponsorship versus mentorship. So mentorship, it looks at me learning from somebody's experience. So I seek out somebody in the business who has the experience that I want to learn from. Sponsorship is different in that it's about somebody speaking up for me or saying my name when I'm not in the room. So it's a senior executive within the business who will speak up for me, who will put me forward for opportunities, who will look out for those opportunities for me. And when those opportunities arrive, they are the ones that are saying my name in that room. So there's a definite difference between sponsorship and mentorship. And in terms of the backlash from men, what we found is, I think Ilona mentioned employee resource groups as well. We have a lot of men represented in our employee resource groups as well, because those voices of men in the organization are really, really important. So on the steering committee of our employee resource group, we also have men, because we also want to be a balanced conversation and we want to hear both sides of the conversation as well.
Great. And do you have anything to say, one recommendation on the most effective measure?
I think the most effective measure is looking at what your boards look like and what your senior managers look like, because you find that a lot of companies look at overall representation, but when you go down into the detail, we really need that representation at the senior manager and the board level. And that's really, really where we need to make the shifts.
Thank you. Natalie, over to you.
Considering I work for a company that, whose core purpose is women, I'm really passionate about engaging men. And one of the things I hate about sessions like this is it's a bunch of women talking about women's issues. You know, I've been in conferences where you've got 200 women talking about women. You know, we need to engage men, you know, and I challenge all of us here who are involved in these kind of events. And thank you, Andreas. I was going to give you a mention. I'm pleased you've given us a wave. You know, we need to make sure that men are part of the discussion. You know, feel really, really passionate about that, and passionate about the fact that this is not about men versus women. You know, a better world for women is a better world for everybody. And that's where some of the arguments and the data points around increased productivity, better performance of those companies that have a broader DEI agenda really come into play. You know, there's both a moral, social argument and a business argument here for doing this. So yeah, kind of both head and heart there. Yeah, I think kind of in terms of your question around what's the most important measure, you know, for me, it's about measurement, actually. You know, it's really about, you know, what gets measured gets done. You know, and I think Darshini kind of said this really well. You know, if you've got a clearer idea of who's working for you, how much are they being paid, what function do they sit in, then you can identify where you have issues and start to course correct. But unless you have that starting point, you're not going to be able to take the steps that you need to.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Julia?
Yes, thank you. So I would definitely argue we need the men on board as well. And what we did at Continental, we engaged or enlarged our focus area. So first, we really very much looked into gender diversity, set ourselves some targets, but now we are also talking about inclusion and belonging. And this is where I think everyone can relate to that we need this kind of culture, this kind of working climate, that everyone feels free to speak up and without kind of punishment, and feels that they have a voice. This voice is being heard and it actually matters that I'm here. And this is what we want when we talk about diversity in general, or diversity of thought. So we don't want the women in there or the minority groups in there because it looks nice. We want to hear their voices. So for us, it is a lot of about the cultural shift that needs to take place in order to get there. And of course, this is also, Ilana, what you said, a lot around leadership and enable our leaders to build this kind of inclusive environment that we need. And for one point, what I would be focusing on, because we found out in our data, so data analytics is actually what I would really recommend everyone to do, because we found out in our data that as soon as women have this kind of first level leadership, they are progressing very fast and very high in our company. But it takes this step into the first level leadership position, and women are applying less for those leadership positions. So what we did is also, we asked them, why are you applying less for leadership positions? And we found out that it's about job design, it's about working overtime, it's about unpredictable hours. So, but knowing this now actually lets us focus resources on where it is actually crucial, where we can help the women to build an environment where they can thrive. So I think building much more awareness around what is it that actually hinders us, or where can we see the glass ceiling, and then going directly to the point into that. So that is for us at least a big learning.
Great, thank you, Julia. Cindy?
I'd actually like to maybe answer one of the other questions that you asked, Anna, in what are you doing next, just because I'm so excited about what we are about to do or starting to kick off at GoTo Group. And also I've heard what people have been doing in their companies, been really inspired by some of things. I've been taking notes, and I hope that some of what we're about to do might also maybe inspire others as well. So we're commencing a gender pay gap audit, comprehensive one done by a third party. We'll also begin a review of our policies and practices to uncover and remove barriers and opportunities for bias. And really, when we're solving that sort of stuff, we would like to try and bring in frontier research and solution building through techniques such as behavioural economics. We'll also be launching our cross-company women's leadership and mentoring program to coincide with International Women's Day next year. And just listening to what people are saying, maybe it's going to be a sponsoring program too. Look, going beyond employees, we want to also take an inclusive approach to our customers and suppliers. You know, a few years ago, GoTo won the award, the WEP award for focusing on increasing women's safety on our ride-hailing services. Similarly, we'd like to focus on increasing accessibility of our platform and services for customers with different needs. We're about to commence exploring with the IFC how gender interplays with access to business information, training and finance to close the gender gap in e-commerce. This is world-leading stuff. We're really excited about it. And we're trying to integrate D&I really widely across the business, as well as being part of sort of an employee-focused employee strategy and talent strategy. And finally, I'd like to just get us talking a bit more about cognitive diversity and leveraging this, going through all the array of diversity that there can be, intersectionalities, and leveraging these different differences into greater creativity, innovation, and complex problem solving. So that's what we're doing for the rest of the year and into the coming years.
Thank you, Cindy. And Ilana, I promised you to have an opportunity to also respond to these questions. And then we have only 4 minutes left. It's been such a great conversation, but Ilana, I give you 1 minute to take one of these questions that the audience were asking.
Thank you. It will be only 1 minute. Thank you. So I will relate that to the question from the audience about the link between DI, diversity and inclusion, and business success. So there are a lot of studies. So we know that it was examined already, but the reason why it is so powerful is that when you have a diverse team with diverse opinion, and by the way, gender equality is only part of it, because diversity has a lot to do with a lot of other elements, you gain a lot of knowledge. If you gain a lot of knowledge, you are becoming stronger and you are promoting the business success. So this is for the question. And as for the one key measure that I would suggest, of course, I will echo everything that my panelists, the panelists said, and I will say maybe one statement. If you want to change the game, you need to have a strong tone of the top and KPIs and work against it. If you want to have it sustainable, you need to invest a lot on inclusiveness.
Thank you so much. We have one final poll that we would like to run before we wrap up. So I would like to thank all the panelists. We could have continued for many, many more hours to talk about this topic. I hope we will be able to respond to questions. We are planning to make a summary of the conversation and we'll incorporate some of the questions. So panelists will reach out to you so you could also add additional inputs to the summary so that we can tease out in the limited time we have all your expertise and insights to this topic. So we'd like to know what you'd like to learn next. We have this regular webinar and what should be the topic in the next webinar. So here are some suggestions. If you don't find the topic on the list, please put them in the chat and we'll consider your inputs from the chat as well. Back to you, Miwa.
Thank you. So my part was ask you for the poll, but since you've done that and we're out of time, and I'd like to ask Anna for a very short closing remark. Meanwhile, we're going to collect the responses from the participants today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miwa. So I would just end with thanking everyone again, including the ExecuShe team for your very interesting presentation. We will be making these the recording available and the infographic. I've seen that a lot of people are interested. As I mentioned, we'll prepare a summary of the conversation and highlight some of the recommendations from the panelists. It has proven that there's still a lot of work to be done. We come from different industries, we come from different sizes of companies, and we need to take a very customized approach to the company to be able to drive change in culture, remove the biases, and engaging the men. Every company is its own unique setting, but we can learn from each other and draw from each other's experiences, lessons learned, challenges, and help us to move forward on this agenda. As many have mentioned, we must also change the narrative. It's not only a right for women to lead, but they are very, very capable, and we need to change the figures that we saw Andreas and Bess presenting today. We can only do that if we do it jointly. We know, and we heard from our panelists, that it does make the company better, not only from a profit standpoint, but from a knowledge and being a global citizen. So I'd like to also add, in addition to engaging men, we also need to bring in a new generation of leaders to make sure that the work that we are doing today remains sustainable and that they are on board in working on this agenda. So I will leave it at that and thank everyone, our panelists, our ExecuShe team for your presentation, and all the participants who have been extremely active and participating in the conversations today. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening, afternoon, or the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.